I started working on Black Girls Teach while I was teaching, just because I was meeting people like Tiffany and other folks throughout my career at all the different schools that I worked at. And I was finding that there wasn't a lot of I would meet somebody here and there and there. And I'm like, how do I bring us all together as Black women educators? How do I start to create a community where Black women educators, where we can really grow? And that's what it started from. And then it really evolved into creating a full-blown company. Where we are today, we provide spaces for Black women educators to be able to grow both personally and professionally.
Amidst all of the conversation about recruiting Black educators, where are the discussions about retention? The Exit Interview podcast was created to elevate the stories of Black teachers, professors, counselors, social workers, and administrators who have been pushed out of the traditional education space. My co-host, Kevin Adams, and me, Dr. Asia Lyons, are on a mission with our guests to inform school districts, teachers unions, families, students, educators, and others interested in understanding the challenges of retaining Black people in education. Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Welcome back to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Kevin, it's been a minute.
Yes, it's been a minute. Definitely.
Yeah.
How you been, Asia?
I was going to ask you the same thing. I cannot complain. It's winter break right now for educators here, as you know, because you're in the middle of it.
Yes.
Sun's out. It's Colorado. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm doing really good. Overall, all things considered, I'm doing very well.
That's awesome. So we have a new guest today, Deidra Fogarty. Let's read a little bit about her. So Deidra is a native of Bridgeport, Connecticut, brings more than 15 years of valuable experience to the field of education. Through her career, she has served in various roles, including educator, literacy coach, assistant principal, and consultant. Recognizing a significant gap in urban education, especially concerning the support and development of Black women educators, Deidra took a proactive step. She founded Black Girls Teach, a consulting boutique dedicated to providing affinity spaces and leadership development tailored to Black women educators. In addition to her work with Black Girl Teach, Deidra is a sought-after speaker on topics related to urban school reform. Furthermore, she actively coaches educators who are venturing into launching their consulting businesses, empowering them to become part of the solution. Deidra's multifaceted approach reflects her commitment to addressing challenges within the education system and fostering leadership among Black women educators. Welcome to the show, Deidra.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, glad to see you here. So, Kevin, I didn't tell you the backstory. So I'm speaking at South by Southwest. I'm scrolling through all the folks who are speaking, and I saw Deidra's topic, and I said, oh my gosh, I have to meet her. And so I'm just chit-chatting, hey, thank you for meeting with me. And we're talking, and I'm back on the Instagrams. And I'm like, well, let me just look up and see what she's up to. How many followers do you have, Deidra?
On our Black Girls Teach page, we have about 40,000 followers on that page. Wow. Yeah.
40,000. So I'm like, oh, if you need any help, girl, I'm like, okay, you don't need no help. Yeah. That just lets you know something. Well, I'm glad you're doing good work. I'm following you on there. So we'll get into how people can follow you and contact you towards the end. But so glad to have you on the show. We'll just jump right into the questions. Tell us, how did you get into becoming an educator? What's your story?
When I was in high school, I was one of those people that kind of felt like I wanted to be a teacher. It was just something that I just kind of came to me. But then I started to engage in experiences. Like my school had a young educator society, which I don't even know if schools have that anymore, but my high school had that. It was putting us, I started working at a daycare center and things like that. And then I worked at an after school program, and I really started to feel wow, I'm really good at this. And I had never really felt like I was really good at something. I always thought I was kind of average at things. But I found when I worked at the after school program, I was getting a lot of really just positive feedback and just feeling like, wow, like maybe I really should become a teacher. And so did different things in high school to like prepare myself to be a teacher because I was like, I'm becoming a teacher. Then went on to University of Connecticut and I applied into their education program my sophomore year. And then I got into the program. And so it was a 5-year program where I got my bachelor's and my master's degree. And being from Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut is surrounded by a lot of wealth. And it is not a city that has a lot of wealth, or like the folks in the city, we didn't get the wealth. Maybe it's somewhere in there, but it's surrounded by a lot of like predominantly white, wealthy cities. And so growing up, I had always noticed the differences between my experience in schools versus what people in the town next door, their experiences were very different, the opportunities. And so I feel like that's where like just some of the drive started to come. But when I actually started engaging in the program at UConn, they intentionally placed us in different types of environments, rural, suburban, urban, until we actually did the student teaching, which is like in our senior year. And I really got a chance to just see how it was just so different, the suburban wealthy communities versus a rural community versus an urban community. And it opened up my eyes and really just solidified like, yes, this is what I want to do. And I want to work in a community where I wanted to work with predominantly Black and Brown students. And I didn't want to be in a place where I was the only Black teacher. So that to me was like, I need to get out of Connecticut because Connecticut, while we do have Black and Brown students, it's oftentimes, the teachers don't reflect that. And you're one of the only at the time. And so after I graduated from college, I said, you know what? I'm going to become a teacher, obviously, but I'm going to be a teacher where there are going to be other Black teachers. So I ended up moving to Baltimore. And that's where I started my career as a teacher. So that's a little bit of my story.
So you moved, started in Baltimore, and you said in your bio that you had a little bit of all types of jobs within education. So tell us about a little bit of all the things, how long you were in teaching. We love the details.
Yeah. So I started in 2006, like in Baltimore, started as a second grade teacher there, Baltimore City Public Schools. And again, was just experiencing real education now. Like I was in it. I was in education for real as a teacher and starting to see all of the different things that came with that. And from there, I ended up worked as a fifth grade teacher and then a sixth grade teacher. So I went from second grade to middle school, just wanting to try something different in a different district in Maryland. And then eventually went into coaching and really feeling like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a coach, then I'm going to be a school leader, then I'm going to be a superintendent. And I just had this big old plan.
Wow.
Yeah.
All the way, the ladder.
That's what I said I was going to do. And I had a lot of people that like would tell me they see me as that. And so when I finally became an assistant principal, it was just a horrible experience. Not anything to do necessarily with the school, the students, or the staff. I just worked under a principal that just wasn't trying to really work with me. And that was my first experience in leadership. And it was just extremely toxic. It was extremely just not how I envisioned it to be. And it was the first time that I felt like, wow, like, okay, maybe I'm not good at this, even though I had always heard that I was. But it was extremely toxic leadership and it shifted my career. So after that, after I was a school leader, I was like, okay, maybe I'm not supposed to be a school leader. So in this capacity. So I went back and went into coaching, back into being a literacy coach. And, in my mind, I'm like, oh, well, I'm taking a step down because I was just a school leader. Now I'm a coach. Like, what's going on? And, it was going good again. And in that role, I ended up being like an interim vice principal because somebody went on maternity leave and then the principal left. So like the last 6 months of school year, I was the interim assistant principal. But still, I was like, you know what? I want to go back. I'll be a coach going back. So I went into my coach role. Again, new leadership came in, completely just changed everything in the school. And then it started to become another toxic environment. And I started to feel those feelings that I felt when I was at the previous toxic environment. And I was like, how do you coach teachers in a toxic environment? Like, everything I say as a coach really doesn't matter if the principal is saying something totally different. So at that point, I was just like, I don't know if I want to do this because it was just causing a lot of stress. My teachers, while they loved me coaching, they would be like, Fogarty, I hear everything you're saying, but it seems like everybody else is just doing the opposite. And it's like, we're trying to do the right thing. And it was just a disconnect between what leadership was talking about versus what we should be doing as educators. So I quit. I quit mid-year. And that was the first time I had ever like quit a job, and I was like, I'm out of here. And I went back into the classroom because I said, I just don't like, this is not how it's supposed to be. And I felt like it was starting to make me very, very, very negative. And so I went back into the classroom. And that was when I started like the final leg of my education tour, where I was a special education teacher. I had already been like certified for it. I just never had done it. And then that was just such a great experience because I felt like it allowed me to truly, really be a master educator. But also it gave me a little bit more of the space to work on my business because I was starting to build my business at the time. And I was able to just have more mental clarity because it just kind of came naturally to me, and eventually ended up in a self-contained classroom as a special education teacher with students who had severe disabilities, autism, developmental delays. And that's where I left off when we went into COVID. That's where I was at. And I had worked at, over the course of my career, 7 different schools. So I am a school hopper. And I have a philosophy about that just like came to me yesterday when I talked to another school hopper. But that's where I ended. My last role was as a special education teacher in a self-contained classroom with paraprofessionals that I absolutely adored. So yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was.
Wow. I mean, first of all, shout out, doing the work, moving through it. As I said, I moved into an assistant principal position. Luckily, I feel like I've been blessed with strong, positive leadership. So it has felt good for me, but I can see how like having a toxic leader could make it a really negative experience and just, make you question it all, and I like to joke when people ask me how it's going. I'm like, oh, I'm not looking at teaching jobs. I'm not going back yet, but sticking with it. But I think one thing that strikes me by your story, Asia and I, we both teach our education careers are in Colorado, predominantly white state, and teaching is predominantly a white endeavor in Denver public schools, throughout the state. In our interviews with a lot of people here in Denver, they talk about racial battle fatigue as being one of the things that pushes them out of the classroom, out of education. You're teaching predominantly with Black educators. Can you tell us like about how that impacted your educational journey, your experience, and ultimate desire? I mean, I would love to know what race those principals were.
Oh, well, that's what I was just about to say.
Okay. Yes.
I mean, yes, definitely taught with predominantly Black educators, educators of color. In the beginning of my career, my leadership was predominantly Black when I was in the beginning stages of it. But actually, when I transitioned into these different types of toxic environments, a lot of times the leadership was not Black. Sometimes they were, right? But sometimes their bosses were oftentimes not Black. So a lot of the executive level leaders in this particular area, while we do definitely have, Black leaders and leaders of color, we oftentimes do have executive level leaders who are over principals who are predominantly white and leading school districts that have predominantly Black students. And so that was a part of my experience. So I had a range, but I definitely have been in spaces where certain things would happen that I would feel like were not in the best interest of our Black students. And it was kind of just like, well, this is just how we do things here. This is just what it is, right? And so, yeah, it was a lot of that type of thing. And even from sometimes when you are a Black leader in those type of environments, you have someone else that you have to adhere to the way they're doing things. And so sometimes these types of very toxic practices are passed down. And I've also been in spaces where things that don't align in terms of, and I don't know what the exact term of it is called, but like, you know, how there was, well, oftentimes we talk about how white supremacy shows up in the workplace, and a lot of people reference what that can look like, white supremacy workplace culture. And I saw a lot of that, even in spaces that were led by Black leaders, right? So, because sometimes when we adhere to certain norms, the people that are adhering to that dominant cultural norm are the ones who become leaders sometimes. And so that becomes perpetuated. No matter who is leading, no matter what color they are, those norms are going to be perpetuated. And that's a lot of what I saw. It's a lot of what I saw.
I think that's a really important point. I like the idea of how white supremacist culture is ingrained, right? And it's not just, again, that you just have a Black leader or brown leader. It's that some of these same leaders, you know, they've grown up in white supremacist schools and culture and society. And so you really reflect it, and that's how you kind of guide your leadership.
Yeah. I want to add a little bit to that. We've had so many folks on this show who talk about that they didn't necessarily have a white leader, but there were folks of color who were just pushing the agenda of white supremacy culture. Kevin knows that I say all the time that every Black person in Selma didn't march. There are going to be folks who are going to turn their head or turn an eye away from harm just for the sake of getting ahead or reaching the top or whatever, or trying to convince themselves, when I get to this position, then I'll speak up. And that speaking up never occurs.
Right. Absolutely. You know, for me, I've always been an educator who speaks up, always, right? For better or for worse. So, you know, either you're going to like me or you're not going to like me because I speak up so often. And that's what I, especially later on the later end of my career, when I started speaking up, it had a lot of influence because I was oftentimes the person on the staff with the most experience, sometimes more experience than the leader themselves. Like the fact that I was a leader and went back into the classroom, that also kind of intimidated people. So when I said things, people really listened to them. People really listened to me. And when I would have questions about things, my colleagues, they would know, like, Fogarty knows what she's talking about. So it definitely was intimidating to the leaders. Whereas in the beginning of my career, no one was really threatened by it. It was like, oh, you know, let me cultivate those leadership skills in you. But then as I had more experience and I was 12, 13, 14 years in, my perspective was like there was incidences where it was tried to like minimize it or trying to be, well, you know, you're being negative or you're being toxic or you always have something to say. And then a lot of times when people experience that, they're just like, you know what, let me just keep my mouth shut. And that unfortunately happens to a lot of outspoken educators who are speaking up about things. They experience whatever the negative ramifications of that. And they're just like, you know what? I'm just going to be quiet. And then nothing ends up changing, you know? And that's kind of like what I was starting to experience. I never really fully got quiet, but I did have moments where I started to try to mute myself a little bit more than I had ever done before, just because I was just like tired of feeling like I'm doing something wrong for advocating for my students or teachers or myself.
That's the part of that racial battle fatigue that we talk about, is that we're doing the work and we're speaking up. And then part of the fatigue, our response to all the racism that's happening, is silence for protection purposes versus for other reasons. Is people just kind of say, I'm always the one speaking up. I'm always the one trying to get the coalition together, get the thing, and not having the support of other folks wears folks down. And then they end up like first being quiet, right? Just, I'm going to focus on my classroom. I'm just going to do my thing. And then folks end up leaving. Not all the time, but a lot of time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we get tired of, now I'm putting the target on my back. Because I would always have people who would, after the meeting, come to me and be like, oh, I'm so happy that you said that. And
yes,
all that type of stuff. And I'm like, well, why you didn't say anything to me, you know, during the meeting? I got to a point where I would say that. I would say, you know, one way you need to support me is during the meeting, and actually saying, you know what, I actually agree with Ms. Fogarty is saying. Don't come to me after the meeting. Don't send me a text message. Don't do any of that, because that's not really helping me. I am putting the target on my back. Now I'm putting myself in a position where I'm not going to get a promotion. they don't even like me because I'm saying the things that you all are not courageous enough to say. And so I got to a point where that was how I felt. And even with the social media aspect of things, because I do have a large community on social media, but I was starting to see again how, when I'm sharing some of these things, some of my beliefs and things like that on social media, I would find that people, they love it. They're like, oh, yes. They love when we're sharing content, or we're talking about all the things that are happening in education. But at the same time, I was also, by me sharing that, that was also stopping me from being able to work with certain school districts and get certain contracts because they see that and they're like, I don't know. Right. So I had moments where I was feeling a little silent from those things as well.
No, that's a big deal too. That whole other piece about how teachers or educators are being censored for the things that they say. And again, this idea of standing up. And we've had other Black educators say the exact same thing that you said about the meetings, about like, why didn't you stand up then? It's the same thing over and over again.
Yep.
How's it feel for you?
For what? In terms of podcasts?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I love talking about these topics. Like you said, the crazy thing is that many people are experiencing the same types of things in all different parts of the country. And that's how I know. It wasn't until I started talking to more people that I realized, like, oh, okay, y'all try to make it seem like it was about me. And I'm
Yes.
thinking that it's all me. But when you start talking to other people, you realize that no, there are other people who are experiencing that. When I created the social media page and started talking more about these things, so many people were drawn to the page because they were like, yes, I'm going through that too. Even people that weren't Black, like who were also very outspoken educators, they were experiencing some of these things as well because of the fact that, they were outspoken and saying the things that people didn't want us to say. And I say that like, I recently had experience where someone who we were supposed to be providing a consulting work for them. The school leaders had the opportunity to kind of decide whether they were opting in or opting out. And there were some that were like, well, we're not going to do it because somebody saw a post that we made talking about something. And our posts are never going to be unprofessional. They're always very, very just like, this is just what it is. They're like, yeah, we just decided we're not going to do that. And so they denied the opportunity for their Black women educators to work with us, some of those school leaders, and because they did not like what we talked about on the page. And I said, that's sad. That's really sad. Those people that were making the decision were not Black women educators, and they made that decision for their Black women educators.
And I think like the next question is about like, and I think this relates to what you're talking about, is what can school leaders, district leaders, union leaders, what can they do to keep Black educators? What would you recommend that they do, like to keep educators like you in the system moving up? Because you had the goal, right? You are the educator that I feel like every district wants, but what would you say?
The first thing is the people that are asking this question have to be ready for the answer, and they have to be ready to admit that they may be part of the problem. They also have to be ready to admit that maybe they may not be the right person in the role. And I think sometimes we have people who are in the power to do all these things, but you may not be the right person. And that's the first step. You have to be ready to realize, like, I may not be the right person who should be even having this role to even be thinking about retention because I'm just not it. So that self-awareness, it starts with them, sis. Before we even get into the strategies, like you need to realize that maybe you shouldn't have this job. Maybe it shouldn't be you that's in charge. The second thing is you have to listen because the retention to me really isn't that complicated.
Yep.
Like it really isn't. But are you really listening to Black educators? Are you listening to them? How are you creating spaces to listen to them? Not just when they're leaving, like continuously creating spaces to listen to them. But it goes back again to these people because I can listen, but I can have all of my bias blinding me from being able to truly hear what's happening because I'm so biased, right? So even if you are listening to them, that's why it goes back to you. And a lot of times I think school districts are wanting to do this retention work, and it's all about let's add this and let's add that and let's do these things. And it's like the work starts with you as the leader, as the executive level leaders, as the talent and recruitment team. And a lot of times they're left out of that DEI work. The DEI work and things like that is oftentimes with teachers. But the real people who need it are the folks who are making these decisions. So I say all that to say, to me, that's where a priority has to be there. And oftentimes I don't think the priority is there. Now, let's say we do have people in positions that are really like they're ready to listen. We need to listen. And through that actual listening, schools can really be able to create action plans to address whatever the areas are that are identified at their school. Because it may be, lack of professional development. It may be lack of psychological safety. There may be a number of things. But in order for you to be able to identify those things, you need to listen. And sometimes that means for many school districts, you need to outsource this to somebody else because sometimes y'all can't handle doing this because you're so biased. So this is why you need to bring in consultants to be able to do some of this work for you so they can be the ones to actually listen, create an action plan, and help you to actually roll it out. That's where I would go. So I wouldn't even get into, necessarily specific strategies because I think it all depends on that particular school district. But I think at the end of the day, if we're listening to educators continuously and committed to actually doing something with that information, like looking at the data, seeing if there are common patterns, if everybody's saying something about certain policies, then we need to look at that policy and think, maybe that's something that we need to unpack. But I feel like sometimes the issue that we're not talking about enough is that, we can put all these things in place, but the folks who are the decision makers and the gatekeepers are not willing to do anything about it or just pass it off to someone else or just miss it, then we're going to continue having this problem and we're going to keep losing Black educators. We're going to keep losing them. So the other side of this that I want to quickly say is I think sometimes in school districts, the priority sometimes is not so much on retention because they know that there's always somebody else that can come in and fill the spot. But now we're in a place where there's not as many people coming in who you can just replace, right? There's not. So we have a recruitment issue and we have a retention issue. And it's like, what are we doing about it though? Because both of those things have to be addressed. But I think with the school district, putting more emphasis on the retention versus the recruitment and really taking it seriously, to me, is a very, very important step.
Thank you for that. Something that I want to go back to what you said about is we have a recruitment and a retention issue. And I just thought about this. We wouldn't necessarily have a recruitment issue if we didn't have a retention issue because Black folks who are teaching would recruit other Black folks to teach.
Absolutely.
What I find is that Black folks who love teaching are recruiting Black folks not to teach. Right? Yeah. And so it's not like folks are leaving and then they're just being silent. They're definitely telling their family and friends what's happening all while they're teaching. And when they decide to leave, nieces, nephews, folks go, right? And so I don't think that school districts are taking that into consideration, that you have folks who are actively making sure that their family members, if no one else, are not going into teaching, right? And so it's their best efforts of pulling out the little booth, doing the HR thing and the little pamphlets. If my cousin or my aunt was in teaching for 12, 15, 30 years and said, this is why you shouldn't go into teaching, I'm going to trust her over this person at the HR table who's talking about bonuses, right? And I think we're not thinking about, and I've said this so many times, we're not thinking about when we recruit teachers, we're recruiting their family members as well. And if we don't consider that how their families can impact and persuade them in any direction to stay or leave teaching, that's a mistake also that I think that districts are making. They're just not taking into accountability the power of family, Black family or otherwise, and people's decisions to stay in teaching or become an educator or whatever that may be.
Yeah. And I haven't really thought about that. And I agree 100% because at the end of the day, I personally am not going to tell someone to never go into education, never go into teaching, just because, I loved being a teacher. I really did. But I don't want, what I think that happens, and I've said this before, is that I oftentimes seen school districts like really heavily recruiting Black educators, at least out here. A lot of districts, especially like, charter districts in particular, but districts out here, you will see the signs on the buses and ads and all, and we're in the commercials and Black educators all over. It just doesn't feel like, to bring Black educators into unsafe spaces, to me, is just not okay. And that's why, like, when I'll have some schools, sometimes I'll reach out on my Black Girls Teach page and they'll say, hey, do you do ads? We would love to be able to share things about our school, and I say, no, I can't. Unless I talk to several people from your school district, I'm not going to, I don't care how much money you give me, I'm not going to advertise your ad for people to work there, because unless it has the Black Girls Teach stamp of approval. Now, if you want to go through that process to have the Black Girls Teach stamp of approval, then I will be happy to be able to walk you through what that process can look like. And then I'm happy to be able to share your school, but I'm not going to be trying to feed people into places that can be unsafe, especially Black educators. No, I'm not doing that. And so I can imagine why, we as Black folks would tell other people, like, yeah, no, like, I wouldn't work at that school. I wouldn't work at that district, because we do that all the time. And we're doing it a lot more. And that's what I think people are not realizing, especially because of social media. We're sharing names. We're sharing names of school leaders. We're sharing names of schools. We're sharing names of school districts. Stay away from that. Stay away from, like, we are doing that. And we're going to keep doing it because we're going to protect one another. Like, that's just how we do. So they need to recognize that certain things, we're no longer in a space where we can do certain things in a district and no one's going to find out. Like, it's just not going to happen. Everybody talks now. We're on TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, and there are people that are dropping names, publicly dropping names of schools and districts to stay away from. So if the time is not now, I don't know when the time is to really start like honing in and addressing these things.
I mean, I think that's so important. I think that's it. That's the work right there.
The power of social media is more folks talking than people or districts are thinking or believing. The billboards are not as powerful as someone speaking to you at your church or somebody speaking to you at brunch and saying, don't go over there.
Don't go over there
instead, or whatever.
Stay away from that.
Yeah. That made me think about retention or recruitment strategies. Like, how many folks who are recruiting Black educators or educators, period, are actually in community with those same folks that they're trying to recruit on the day-to-day, right? Because that trust has to be built. And again, there are so many jobs out here that aren't specific to being in a school district that educators can do. This is not 1940, right? We are doing so many other things. We're even in curriculum development organizations and things like that, right? Writing curriculum, all types of things. And so really school districts need to be thinking they are in competition, not with just real estate or some other career out there, but really education companies too, that may have their own issues, but at least you're getting paid more for some people, right?
Yeah. You're getting paid more and you're feeling respected. You're feeling valued.
Yeah.
I mean, there's organizations out there that help teachers to leave the classroom and get roles in other educational fields. Like, there are businesses that have been created that folks are just eating up to be able to do that. There's more folks who are going into entrepreneurship, building their consulting business. Like, there's just so many options now. So yeah, there's a lot of competition, a whole lot.
Yeah, we're not necessarily leaving teaching traditional classrooms, yes, but we're not leaving supporting youth. And that's the piece. Yeah. Something to think about. I hope there's some folks out there who are in HR or whoever are out listening to this, because this is something that people need to take into account. So this is my favorite part of the show, is when we talk about, like, after recruitment and retention, we added a new question to our podcast. Super excited. And the question that I want to ask first is, do you have a Black educator that you want to shout out, who you want to share a story about that's positively influenced your life, either now, when you were younger? Is there someone out there that you'd like to dedicate this particular episode to?
Okay. Let me think about that. A Black educator that I would want to shout out is actually a friend of mine. Her name is Tiffany, and she has been an educator for probably about as long as I have. Now she's an assistant principal. She is someone like myself, has worked in different schools, different roles, like leadership, went back into the classroom. And really, at the end of the day, she loves to be a master educator. Like, that is really important to her, to be really good at what she does. And she's someone who would be like perfectly content staying in the classroom, working. She's a high school educator, staying in the classroom and really like just continuing to sharpen her skills. And because she's so good, people are always wanting to like take her out of the classroom. So now it is in a leadership role and, able to really impact in so many different ways. I feel like I want to see her leading a school district, or because she just has a brilliant mind, not only just like instructionally, but like when it comes to coaching, when it comes to just thinking about things differently. And I feel like she is always someone that I have gone to, whenever, if I've had like certain challenges that I'm experiencing, or I need a thought partner, or just really thinking through, how to navigate certain situations. And I think I've helped her with that as well. But whenever I think about just like helping teachers to really grow in their craft or in their leadership journey or coaching, I think about like, well, how can I bring Tiffany into this to be able to lead part of that work? Because she is just phenomenal in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. And I think we need to have more leaders that can do that, that can be like, listen, put me in the classroom and I will teach this lesson and I'm going to show you exactly the different moves and I'm going to walk you through it. And now I'm going to coach you through it. But then I'm going to hop into the leadership side. And like, there's not a lot of leaders that can do both, that can navigate both of those spaces really, really well. And I think she is someone that I feel like just has always been able to navigate both of those spaces inside and outside of the classroom and comfortable in either one. And so, yeah, I would shout her out and dedicate it to her.
Shout out to Tiffany.
Yeah.
Sounds like an amazing educator.
Yes, definitely. And she's one of the few DC born, DC bred, DC educated, teaching in DC. And that's really, really rare. It's really, really rare. And she brings that lens when we're working with DC educators, like most of the times they're not from DC. And she's able to bring that lens. And I think that's really important in a leader. And you don't see that a lot where I'm from the community. I was born, I was raised, I was educated here. And now I'm teaching and leading here. It doesn't happen very often. And that culture, like that's needed. Like you have to have that. Even for me, I have not experienced teaching and leading in the city that I'm from, Bridgeport, Connecticut. But there is a part of me that at some point, maybe I will, right? Because I do think it's important to be able to say, like, I am from here. Like I grew up in the same communities as you. I understand the different nuances of this environment. And a lot of that has been lost, I think. It's been lost in a lot of communities where that's not the case anymore. Oftentimes we have a lot of people who are from outside of the community or outside of culture who are making the decisions.
You've mentioned it, and I think this is also part of why we move into the best part of the podcast for Asia. I think I love it too. Tell us about Black Girls Teach, your work that you're doing, since you've left the traditional classroom, all of those pieces.
Yeah. So I started working on Black Girls Teach while I was teaching, just because I was meeting people like Tiffany and other folks throughout my career at all the different schools that I worked at. And I was finding that like there wasn't a lot of like, I would meet somebody here and there and there. And I'm like, how do I bring us all together as Black women educators? How do I start to create a community where Black women educators, where we can really grow? And that's what it started from. And then it really evolved into creating like a full-blown company. Where we are today, we provide spaces for Black women educators to be able to grow both personally and professionally. We do that through our membership community. So through our membership community, we're providing personal and professional development to our members who are just in a season where they are feeling stuck. They're feeling like they're not growing at their school. They're feeling like, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do next, whether that's leadership or sometimes leave education, whatever it may be. They're just in that season of feeling like they need something more. So oftentimes they join our community, they sharpen those skills that they need, they get the confidence, they meet other people, they start having connections, things like that. And another part of our work is working directly with schools. So we have been really honing in on providing leadership development for teacher leaders, Black women teacher leaders, and really providing those adaptive skills and things related to emotional intelligence and self awareness and how to navigate leadership as a Black woman. So, for example, we talk a lot about communication and how, assertive communication and what that looks like, what that sounds like. But I can't talk about that unless I say, as Black women, when we are speaking assertively, somebody's going to say you got an attitude. Someone's going to say that you're being aggressive. Someone's going to say that, especially if I'm talking just like this, someone's going to have a problem with it. And so, how do you navigate that? How do you respond to that without letting it just shake you to the core? Because a lot of times that's what it does. So, we actually explicitly teach them those skills on how to do that. And then, ideally, a big part of our work that we're wanting to start to hone in on a bit more is working with school leaders who are supporting Black women educators. Because a lot of the times, like the work is often like, oh, okay, yes, we can work with the Black teachers, Black women educators. Yes, work with them, fine. But then it's like, well, what about you? Like you're saying you're not a Black woman educator, but you're leading them and you're judging them and you're making decisions and all of these different things. So now the next phase of the work is making that connection. So I can not only support your Black women teacher leaders as well as leaders, but I also need to help the folks that are making decisions and leading them and all of those things because you need to know how to be able to really support Black women educators. And a lot of times the focus is not on Black women, it's oftentimes focused on Black men or Black educators as a whole or educators of color as a whole. It's like it's rare that we're isolating and pinpointing Black women. And for me as an entrepreneur, like I have had to fight against that because I've had people say, well, the focus right now is not Black women, it's Black men. We don't want to just have like it's a bad thing to focus primarily on Black women. And so I know that for me as a Black woman, when I experienced that type of rejection initially, I took it really personally. I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to do this because it seems like people don't want it. They don't want to focus on Black women. They rather focus on everybody else but us. But then I was like, nope, I need to keep doing this because that tells me that there is a need. And I continually have people that are coming to me and saying, like, I would love for you to, like, I wish we could work with you. I want my school district to be able to partner with you. And, it's not always easy to get to that point. There's a lot of like legwork, a lot of things that I have to do, marketing, social media. That's why, I have to have a presence because I have to really highlight that this is important. Like this is Black women deserve to be supported. They deserve to be able to grow. And we can't do that without even acknowledging their identity as Black women. So that has been just like the battle, but it's also, that's what I love. If anybody's ready for that battle, it's been me. I'm always ready for something. So I've been doing that. And then I'll say the last part of my work that I've started like the last couple of years is really helping other educators to be able to start businesses aligned with their passions as well, because everything that I've done has been in line with my passion as a Black woman educator. And so there are so many educators that are out there that have ideas and have strengths and have expertise, but they just don't necessarily know how to start the business and then market and promote the business. So it's like we have some who have started businesses, but now how do you get clients? How do you get customers? How do you get people to pay you? Like those are skills that a lot of times, how do you market yourself on social media? Many educators don't necessarily know how to do that. And so I've learned how to do that over the years. That's how I'm able to be a full-time entrepreneur now. So now part of my work is teaching and supporting and coaching other educators to be able to do that. So that we can be in those spaces that we need to be in to be able to do this work. And so that's what Black Girls Teach has been doing over the past 6 years now.
If folks want to get involved with Black Girls Teach, how do they get involved?
Yeah, I think the best way is we're on Instagram. So you can follow us on Instagram. Definitely check out our website. I have a page called Teach Me D that's kind of like more for the business coaching side of things. So if you're an educator and you're interested more in just being able to, start a business that is rooted in your passion, Teach Me D is the place to go. But for Black women educators as a whole, the Black Girls Teach platform via Instagram, we're on LinkedIn as well to be able to connect with us and just see how we can partner in this work together.
Fantastic. I do want to say two things. One, this focus on recruitment of Black male educators. We've seen that a ton out here in Colorado too. And I was just talking to someone about this. We have a new program that just came in and it's getting a lot of buzz because it's Black men. We need more Black men teachers. And I was talking to my committee chair and I said, well, Black women are doing the work right now. So where is the funding for them? How are we supporting them? Because it seems like all of our funding, all of our focus goes to Black male educators. And we can figure out how to share some of that. But I've really struggled with that. And Kevin and I have noticed when we're interviewing folks, we interview Black women on our podcast, the stories that they share is just so different from the stories that Black men share on the podcast. You're right. It's happening here in the mountain states. There's so much focus on Black male educators. There's so much, funding. And it's just really unfortunate. So as a side note, my friend and I have a Black educator wellness cohort. We support Black folks or Black women and non-binary folks in person here in Colorado, in the metro area. And we made a decision after our first cohort to focus only on Black women and non-binary folks, right? Just because of the needs that we have and the conversation and the energy and everything else. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because I 100% agree with you on that. And the second thing is so many Black women who I talk to also want to start a business and they have an idea and it just kind of sits right there.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of us are kind of nervous about the selling, about the getting out there and talking about it. Like, this is what I do and reaching out to strangers or whatever the strategy is. That's where people get stuck. Women get stuck. So I'm glad that you are doing that work of helping them start it, to market it, to promote it, because so many of us, I've heard people say on this show, Kevin and I, I'm just a third grade teacher, right? People just didn't have enough belief in themselves to say, you can do this.
Right.
You have a great idea. So to know that your organization, your company is doing this for Black women is beautiful. And I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you. And I'll say real quick too, like that's a big part of our work is really, at the end of the day, the confidence is so important because I want to be able to, like, my goal is to just be able to create spaces, learning communities where we are able to just center just us being more confident to be able to go after whatever that next thing is, whether it's a leadership role, whether it's applying to another job within education or starting a business. So having the confidence to be able to do that. That's really important because many of us, we will overthink, we will talk ourselves out of things, we will have imposter syndrome. If we've ever received any type of negative feedback, all we'll think about are those things. And then we don't necessarily take action because we just don't know where to start. And then on the flip side of that, when it comes to when you do have a business, like there is no way around it. You have to market, you have to promote yourself, you have to do all the things that confidence is required to do that. For me, I'm like, okay, well, if I really help to strengthen our confidence, then that's going to help you regardless of what path you choose. So if you decide you want to start a business, great. You already have the experience, the expertise, you got the confidence. So now you can go out there if you want to be a leader, whatever it may be. But it's like, there's not a lot of focus on that, on just like really developing us as Black women and Black women educators. It's just not a lot of focus on that. And so that's, for me, has been just like the number one thing, because I've seen the results that we have gotten from being able to do that. Like I've seen people who have started businesses who are making money as educators and consultants. Like they are doing all these amazing things. Like I just had two people this past quarter who had school districts reach out to them to be keynote speakers. And this is just from them being really strategic with their social media presence and with their business. And so now they have school districts that are willing to pay them to speak, right? And meanwhile, people at their job aren't always realizing the asset that they are. And so my goal is to help you to realize that you are the asset. And, if your school doesn't see that, that's fine. We can find other places that are going to see it and value it and pay you for it.
Love that.
Thank you.
Well, last question. So what's bringing you joy these days? What's the thing that's making you, obviously you talked about your business, you talked about a lot of other things, but are there other things that are like bringing you joy and peace and happiness that you love to share with our audience?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because the work that I do really does bring me joy because this is what I've always wanted to do. And I am at a point where I'm like, okay, I do need to like find things outside of work, but I really I really do love the work that I do. I wake up and I'm always excited. There's stuff about being an entrepreneur that's just like not great, just like the hustle and bustle of it. But I love being able to work one-on-one sometimes with my clients and really help them to build their confidence and build their business. And then they come back and they're like, yeah, this is what happened. And I love moments like that where they're so excited about the opportunities that are coming their way because of the fact that they decided to really believe in themselves. And so I get a lot of joy from that. I love being able to spend time with my family. My family is mostly in Connecticut. So like being able to go home for the holidays and like laugh and just have a good meal. I'm usually not cooking, but I'm helping in the background, doing things like that also brings me a lot of joy. Being able to like just travel when I want to, when I feel like it, without having to like ask permission. That really feels good to be able to do that, to be able to travel, explore different parts of the world. Right now, I'm thinking about, I really want to get a puppy. That's on my list. That's been on my list for like 5 years. My family, they're like, when are you going to get a puppy? And I
Commit,
yes, I'm going to get one. I feel like I'm more ready because I love animals and I love like puppies. And that's just something that I've been thinking about. So hopefully maybe by the time this podcast airs, I will have, I will have a puppy because that's been on my list for a while. I think that will bring me even more joy. So those are, I would say, and of course, like just spending time with my friends as well. A lot of my friends are also educators. So we always end up talking about educational issues, but it's just nice to be able to talk to people who get it, who just understand and not feel you're the only one out there getting fired up about certain things. Like they get as fired up as I do. And so it's good to be able to have that space to be able to go to when things are challenging. So yeah, I would say those are things that are bringing me joy right now.
Very good. Love all of it.
Love it.
Thank you.
Well, this wraps up our episode of the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the audience for listening in. And give us that one more time, your socials, so that we can have it out there one last time.
Yes. So you can follow me at Black Girls Teach on Instagram. I think my LinkedIn is more so my name, Deidra Fogarty. So you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. And then I have other Instagram account, Teach Me D, that is more focused on the business aspect of being an educator. So between those 3 places, definitely connect with me.
All right, you heard it. You all have a great day. Peace out. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators, please help support the podcast by sharing it with others, posting on social media, and leaving a rating and review. And as always, we're looking for former Black educators to interview. If that's you, send us a message on our website, exitinterviewpodcast.com.